Hey everyone, welcome to Shadow on the Page. I am your host, Giovanni Diaz. Thank you so much for coming to hang out with me. This is the very first episode, so I am very excited and very nervous. Uh, the healthy ratio between the two, but that's okay. I think that's the way it should be. A little bit about the podcast. This is a place where I will present my fiction, my short stories, and from time to time, hopefully, samples of any bigger works that I'm working on, from novels to screenplays and plays. I've been writing for a really, really long time. I absolutely love stories, and though my taste range from everything from horror to drama to comedies, here we'll be exploring darker works and stories that range more in the horror genres and dark psychological genres, as I've always been very passionate about that genre. And I know a lot of you are too, as we all share a love for the things that go bump in the night and the unknown and the great mysteries of the world. And I am just happy to have this opportunity to be able to write these stories and present them to you. And more than anything, I hope you like them. So, with all that said, we're going to get right to it. Our very first story is a short story I wrote some time ago. It's called 4-H. It follows the events of a stranger moving in to a neighborhood and everything that follows from there. After you listen to the story, we'll come back and I'll talk a little bit about where the idea came from. I hope to do that with every episode. Talk about how the idea came, and then potentially explore how ideas hit us, where these creative sparks come from, because in a very real sense that's a mystery. It's kind of the best kind of mystery, I mean, everybody's process is different, and I really feel like when creators share that process, we can all learn a little bit, perhaps try new techniques ourselves, or even if we can't do that, at least entertain or consider different ideas and viewpoints, from how these ideas come into fruition. And if you just want to listen to a good scary story or a good strange story, then hey, you can do that too, and just get an understanding of where this all comes from, as I try to figure it out myself. So with all that said, gonna present to you 4-H now. I really, really, really hope you like it. If you don't, hey, thanks for stopping by anyway. Feel free to comment and share about it, and here we go. And I'll see you guys afterwards. 4-H by Giovanni Diaz. There wasn't a night we didn't wonder what was going on in apartment 4-H. The block thrived that summer. Old vendors sang as they pushed shaved ice carts. Ice cream trucks jingled. The corners buzzed with the laughter of weed dealers, the tack and smack of men and women slapping dominoes onto wooden tables, and the vibrant blare of music pulsing through budget speakers. Little girls and boys ran, played, and reveled in another night free from the looming specter of school. The world was alive, streetlights painting the sidewalks in vivid hues. I spent most of my time in my building's courtyard with my friends Jonathan and Herman. We talked, fantasized epic alien battles with hand-me-down water guns, competed in the World Series with wiffle ball bats, and ogled pretty girls who came from other buildings. We were bordering adolescence, and it was our first real taste of the outside world after dark. I savored the feel of warm bricks beneath my fingers as we sat against the courtyard fence, enjoying the sweet ache in my limbs from a day filled with adventure. But as the evenings neared their end, as the night air stilled, our eyes crept to the blackened windows of the apartment above mine. 4-H. A tenant moved in a few months before. I saw him once, a young man wearing a heavy black hood on a damp spring day, standing in the middle of the courtyard and scanning the surrounding windows. I was all curiosity, watching from behind the security gate that barred my room from the fire escape. His pale blue eyes found mine and locked on. I saw within them a hollow thing, emptiness that seethed against the gentle features of his baby face. He smiled at me. I looked away, but when I dared another glance, I found him still watching, still smiling. His presence was at first a curiosity. People from around the way talked about how he never seemed to leave his apartment. Maybe he was afraid, a white boy in a Latino neighborhood. Others thought he was acting like he was too good for everyone, a snob. Whatever it was, his absence was noted. During the day, his windows were closed and covered with white blinds. At night, those blinds were open, but the windows were lightless, black, empty. Neither my parents nor I heard him walk across his floor, flush a toilet, open his door, or come down the stairs. I pressed my ear against the walls, straining to hear anything from his apartment. Silence always greeted me. As summer bloomed, Jonathan, Herman, and I stared at those windows and exchanged theories and rumor. "Maybe he left," Herman said. "Like he just needs a place for his stuff?" "My dad said the day he came, he didn't bring anything with him," Jonathan replied. "The fuck?" "I know." "Does Albert's dad know anything?" Jonathan said. "He told my ma that he paid for a year's worth of rent in cash," I replied. "Plus he never needs anything fixed." "Damn. He's not freaked out that he never sees him? He's getting paid. He doesn't care." One night we crept up the gray metallic steps of my building and stopped before 4-H. We held our breaths, listening beyond the buzzing of fluorescent lights for any hint of life beyond the door. All was silent. We looked at each other and shrugged. There were better things to do, adventures to be had. As we turned to go, Herman seized my arm. A sliver of light erupted beneath the door. Jonathan crashed down the steps. He was always skittish, always quick to flee from the slightest hint of danger. But this time he was right. There was something harsh about the glow, something eerily tangible. As if it wasn't light at all, but a tongue of broken glass seeping towards us, hungry. Herman hesitated for a moment, giving my arm a feeble pull before he fled. I stayed. I can't tell you why. But the light locked me in place, seeping into my mind with the weight of dead voices, each one urging me to wait, to see. The light thickened into blood that pooled at my feet in a methodical flood, and there were things in the blood, nameless shapes that bobbed just beneath the surface. I stumbled backwards, slipped, fell 3 steps, and grasped onto the banister. Then I turned and hobbled after my friends, my own panicked breath not loud enough to diminish the sound of blood dripping behind me. We told no one. We didn't believe it ourselves. Later on, I checked on the steps above my landing, but saw no blood, no sign that anything had spilled. But that didn't matter, because 4-H was no longer silent. I was sitting in the living room with my dad, trying to understand a pretty anchor woman as she fired off news in rapid Spanish, when a hollow whine seeped through the ceiling. Both of us looked up, my dad lowering the television's volume. 3 soft steps whispered above us. We heard the crack of 4-H's lock turning. The door sang open with rusty vocals. Whispers echoed, strange sounds like incantations. Then the door crashed shut. 3 more steps hissed above us. And then silence. My father and I looked at each other for a long time. "Don't tell your," he began to say, but then dropped it. To acknowledge it would be to give it power. And something on his face told me that was the last thing he wanted. He turned back to the TV and raised the volume, but neither of us watched. The thing about nightmares is they seem real. When you're trapped in a bad dream, you don't realize you're dreaming. There's a cruel certainty to the horrors of your sleeping mind, so when you wake and the dread leaves you, you're left in a state of relief. I think nightmares are a way to remind you that reality ain't so bad. It's the opposite in waking life. When something strange happens, it leaves you in a daze, leaves you questioning yourself and everything around you. You make excuses. You find rational explanations. You comfort yourself so life can go on, because people don't want anything to do with the abnormal. Not really. But sometimes you encounter something that reaches out from the black spaces of existence and tears down your notions of reality. Abominable teeth rip apart your faith in an orderly universe. And then you know deep down, in that guarded place of your heart, that those black spaces are teeming with awful awareness. An awareness that is focused on you. And there's nothing you can do about it. 3 steps. Door opens. They whisper, they sing, they chant. The door closes. 3 steps. Silence. That became ritual. My parents made the dreadful ascent one night and knocked on 4-H to ask the tenant to stop. He never answered, and they did not linger. I first heard them in the middle of the night. A musical sound awoke me. Scuffling came from above, followed by rapid footsteps. A musical sound came again, as if a broken wind chime was caught in a gale. It was the sound of children laughing. Not just 1 or 2, but many. My bedsheet clung to me, soaked despite the chill of the air conditioner, and I fought to fall back asleep. But my mind was racing, aware. Their giggles went on, mingled with thuds and a wet sound, like a knife slicing through meat. And there was something else. I don't know what. Or maybe I just don't want to know. Maybe some things are best left to the confines of a boy's imagination. But that night I was certain I heard muffled screams. No one believed me. My friends shook their heads and accused me of fucking with them. My father yelled, not wanting me to scare my mother. But I saw the way all of their eyes caught the shaded windows of 4-H whenever we passed through the courtyard. In kinder moods, my parents promised me I was just having bad dreams. That's a parent's job. Comfort your child against what you hope isn't happening. 3 steps, doors open, Those strange voices. Door closes, 3 steps. A glance would pass between Mom and Dad whenever it happened, and in those moments they knew I was not having nightmares. 2 weeks after I heard those children laughing, my stomach tore me from bed and urged me to one of those biblical dumps that you brag to your friends about. The urgency of it made me forget my growing fear of the late night hours. I made it to the bathroom, did my business, wiped, washed, and felt the sweet need for sleep caress me as I shuffled back to my room. I froze by my bed. 3 small figures stood before the curtained window, their silhouettes jagged and ghastly. "We know you're in there," they said, speaking as one, their voices sweet. From 4-H came the sound of a harsh voice uttering some incomprehensible language. My heart heaved. One silhouette turned and jumped off of the fire escape. Another darted up the steps. The last stood, staring into the window, waiting. It giggled, sprang to the left, and was gone. Quiet took hold. A siren yowled in the distance. A drunkard's voice carried from half a block over, and the courtyard's lamps hummed electric. I sighed with relief. And then a voice spoke to me from by my feet. "Thanks for not telling on me." I knew where it came from. I knew I shouldn't look, but I did. I had to. The face, pale and smiling, became a blur as it ducked beneath my bed. There was a skittering sound like the sprinting of centipedes. The wall to my left gave off a harsh cracking noise, and the skittering went on behind it, joining with giggles rising up into 4-H. Everything went black. When I awoke, I was on the floor. The light was on, and my father was shaking me. My mother's frantic and tired face hovered over his shoulder. It had been a nightmare, they said. I could see their exhaustion, could see work looming for both of them in a few hours. It had been a nightmare. I had been screaming, they said. I had been screaming in my sleep. But it was okay. It had only been a nightmare. There were cracks running up and down the wall beside my bed. I slept on the couch for the next week. It stopped with the same suddenness with which it had begun. One day there were no more footsteps, no more whispers, no more shadow children at play by my window. 4-H returned to a malignant nothing. I was content to leave it if it left me. The end of summer loomed, and with it that strange excitement the coming of school brings. The girls I'd be meeting, the friends from other neighborhoods I would reunite with, the new experiences that would further shape me into whoever I was supposed to be. Normalcy returned with the passing weeks, and I was happier for it. One night I awoke seized by blind panic, as if a current of electricity was searing the blood in my veins. The numbers on the digital clock were upside down. I shivered against the weight of oppressive cold. Silent stretch, total, absolute. And then screeching pierced the stillness. I looked towards the window, covering my ears, watching with perfect dread as the curtain slowly parted. The tenant stood there, faceless, draped in his hood. The lights of the courtyard flashed off and on, each beat of darkness growing longer and longer. The tenant's arms stretched at his sides, and I saw what should have been hands, but they were too long, too narrow, too curved. He moved in stuttering motions, as if he were skipping in and out of time. Something whipped the air behind him like a tail, and attached to the tail was a thing that looked like a leering face. But all of those things were nothing compared to his eyes. They were blue, sharp and deep and cold and empty, and they were staring right at me, no different from when they had first found mine. The window flew open, its latch breaking free and landing with a clang against the sill. The security gate was ripped to the side, screaming. The tenant came in, moving like water, a malformed thing mocking the laws of reality with his very existence. I screamed. I awoke on the floor, streetlight pouring over me, my mother crying, my father staring at the open window, the damaged gate, and the broken latch on the sill. The reaction was swift. My mother called the cops, but the men of my neighborhood would not wait. Here was something to pin on 4-H. Here was a reason to storm the door, break it down, and pull the monster from his cave. Our courtyard filled with people. My father and his friends charged up the stairs, bats and knives in hands, their rage fed by righteous indignation. Others stormed up the fire escape, ready to capture the tenant if and when he tried to escape. But the window was closed, the gate was drawn, and the shade was down. Albert's father screamed at them from below not to break the window. They didn't have to. When my father and his men crashed against 4-H, the door came open with ease. No one moved for a time, but finally my father stepped inside. The others followed. No one screamed. No one gasped. There was only my father's voice. Oh my God. The police brought box after box of blood-caked children's toys from 4-H. Men in hazmat suits brought down the body bag with the tenant's remains inside. Suicide, they said. At least a few months done. Another body bag was carried out, bearing the remains of a local drug addict who had vanished some weeks before. The stench filled the building for days after. How it never escaped 4-H until that point, I'll never know. A brief news blurb came later. Police were able to connect some of the toys to a few missing children. Some of the cases were recent, from that very summer. Some were decades old. No one ever followed up, because no one really wanted to know what happened. Some things were best left alone. It took a week for authorities to collect and catalog everything, and longer for Albert's father to clean up the filth that coated the walls, stained the ceilings, and filled the tub. And then it was over. Something had been lifted from the neighborhood. The air seemed clean, lighter. 4-H waited for its next occupants, but they wouldn't come for some time. I had been unhurt despite it all, and slowly, I learned to forget. Life became girls, homework, new friends, and a fading childhood. Water guns were replaced by basketballs. Playing make-believe was forgotten in a haze of new sneakers, the latest hair gel, and hip-hop music. My parents were begrudgingly satisfied to return to their usual routine of laughing over dinner and fighting over drinks. I developed an interest in knives, and I suddenly loved watching gory movies. My insides would go cold, and I would imagine myself as the monsters in them. That was natural for a boy my age, right? All was well. All was sane. I was let out from school early one afternoon. The holiday break had begun, promising family get-togethers, gifts, and good food. My spirits were high, so I thought nothing of coming home to find the apartment freezing. My father had left the window open. He had done it before. I would hunt it down and close it after I dropped my book bag in my bedroom. But I didn't have to look far. I found my bedroom window open, along with the new gate my parents installed at summer's end. Hanging from the top of the gate was a black hood. Beyond, a ragged doll sat at the bottom step of the fire escape, staring at me, trembling in the wind, dark-faced and smiling a stitched smile. It had blue eyes. A knife was stabbed into its stomach, its handle black and spattered with dry blood. Misshapen handprints stained the window and the surrounding walls. And a parting message was written on my blanket in the chaotic hand of a child. You're it. All right, and we're back. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed that. So, a little bit about the origins of that story. So, no surprise, I grew up in a block very similar to the one that was described there. And it was, it had its problems, as any urban environment does. But it was also, in a strange way, a tight-knit community. A lot of people, didn't get along, but at the same time, it was kind of the enemy that you knew, right? There was a familiarity and a sense of, hey, we're all in this together, even if we don't particularly like each other very much at times. And, another thing is, a lot of films that explore what it's like to grow up in an urban neighborhood ignore the fact, or just kind of gloss over the fact that it's fun, which is completely understandable because, there is so much, there's poverty, there's crime, and there are all these things that are happening. But, at the same time, life goes on everywhere, and there are also parties and get-togethers and people hanging out in the park and barbecues and, and it's a community interestingly enough, I find that it's more of a community than a lot of suburban areas can be. Of course, that depends. These are just general statements, so please keep that in mind. I'm not trying to ruffle any feathers or start any problems. That's my cat. You can hear him, in the background. I'm not sure if he agrees, but it's very interesting to see how spread apart people can be in nicer areas compared to growing up in in a more poorly developed place. And yet when you don't have much to escape to, the corner becomes your hangout, and you're forced to interact with people and get to know one another. And for a long time that was normal, and yeah, it had its problems, but it was fun at the same time. It's you make home is what you make it, I suppose, right? Well, when I was a kid, there was this young guy and his girlfriend who lived across from us, and he didn't come out much. Him and his girlfriend were they were different from everybody else, and they like to basically keep to themselves. And they never caused any problems. Definitely didn't invade people's homes with dark supernatural abilities. But it always stuck with me. I was always very curious about them. Their shades were usually drawn a lot. Exchanged a couple of hellos, but it was a curiosity for for some of us growing up. Not for long, you know. It was like anything else. You got used to it, and it was like, oh, there they are. But you know, I hadn't thought about it for many years, and then one day, I was, you know, I just remembered seeing him, and it all hit me. Just this idea of what would it be like if a young kid, a young boy had a new neighbor who was some kind of inhuman. Tried and true ground, right? It's not an exactly 100% original idea. But that's the thing about ideas, right? There's no such thing as a completely original idea. The originality comes from your spin on it. You know, I can take the same concept and write a completely different story based on it, as anybody else could. As you should. If the idea interests you, I hope you go ahead and do the same exact thing and see what you make of it. And that's what's beautiful about the narrative form. That's what's beautiful about art. We all take the same concepts and put our spin on it. So I guess more than anything else, what I'd like from you to take from all this is, you know, if you're out there, especially, you know, anybody making something, and I don't care if it's a story or a sculpture or a business, and if you're worried about originality, stop worrying about that. Spoiler alert, there's no such thing, except the fact that it comes from you, and whatever it is that you're doing, no one else can do, as long as you do it the way you want to do it, the way you see it. And there's going to be a ton of people telling you to change this and change that, and that's not always a bad thing. You know, it's a fine line to ride between, well, I should make something completely my way, and I shouldn't let anybody deter me from what it is, versus, you know, making a horse by committee, which is a camel, right? So, you know, it's that balance between creating something and then taking other people's opinions into consideration, and really asking yourself, hey, do I agree? Are they right about that? Does that work? Does this work? So with all that said, you know, don't stop yourself. Don't let fear stop yourself from going off and making something. You know, the hardest part is to start, and there's going to be people who will ridicule you, and, you know, those people can go fuck themselves, because it's a scary thing to make something. But it takes nothing to tear something down. And I'm not talking about criticism. Valid criticism is a beautiful thing, because it helps you. A critic doesn't come to you and say, oh, this sucks. A good critic comes to you and says, hey, okay, so this is what works and this is what doesn't work, right? Because they are a legit fan of the art form, or of what you're trying to do, and they just want to see it done right. That's what a good critic does. What a bad critic does is just tear something down because they can't do it themselves and they're bitter about it. And there's a major difference between the two. But so going back to the idea for the story. In general, I think, especially when it comes to horror stories, it's important to remember that horror thrives from the concept of the known, you know, the most innocuous things being torn apart or being completely twisted. You know, you take a simple concept or you take an everyday item, and suddenly you imbue it with this dark unknown power, and there you have the potential for fear. You hear it in you know, all sorts of ghost stories and you know, all sorts of, you know, monster sightings, you know, even the things that are supposedly true. It's the introduction of the uncanny into your world. And I don't claim full credit on that. That's the highlight of the uncanny is specifically something that Thomas Ligotti talked about. If you don't know who Thomas Ligotti is, you should read his short stories. He's a fantastic short story writer. And those are my cats going ballistic. I apologize. And yeah, so it's if you want to explore something, I guess the other thing what I'm trying to get at is there's nothing too small. There's nothing too mundane that you can't put your spin on, or that you can't bring about a kind of magic with it, regardless of if it's horror or if it's romance or if it's a profound insight. That goes back to Proust's Madeleines, right? He eats a Madeleine, and all of a sudden he remembers his entire life. He remembers, eating the same cookie as a child, and the story starts from there. It's the little thing, a spark is the perfect metaphor, because it truly is the little things that starts the hero on the journey, that starts the strange happening, that starts the connection between two people. And these are all the things, along with good conflict, along with knowing what a character wants. These are the things that make good stories what they are. So going back to 4-H, it's gone through a lot of revisions, and it's gone through a lot of different drafts, but it's always kind of held a special place in my heart, because you'll notice as you go further along, I actually don't have a lot of first-person narrative stories, and I enjoy writing in the third-person narrative more than anything else, because you just I feel like you can explore so much more with different characters on the page, and when you're in a first-person narrative, you gotta focus it a little more, and that narrator can speculate, depending on who the narrator is, but maybe can't be entirely sure about what's going on. But with 4-H, it felt perfect, because it added that sense of mystery, and I was able to draw on a couple of memories myself. Not too many, I promise you, not too many, which I'm grateful to say, because God knows I don't want what happened to the narrator happening to me, nor should you. But it was in a strange way. It was probing back into my own memory, and drawing from it, and discovering these shadowy places where I could expand that darkness, and take a staircase, or take footsteps above, or take the simple swinging open of a door and making something that inspired fear in the character. And it's anytime you live in a close-knit community so close to other people, there are always those secrets, there's always those questions about what's really going on, and that was a lot of fun to explore. That was definitely a lot of fun to explore, and I hope you enjoyed it. I really do. So with all that said, that's it for now. Thank you so much for listening. I will be back next week with a story that I am particularly excited about. A little bit about it. It throws soldiers into a very unexpected situation. It's a short. It's a piece of flash fiction, but with all that said, I really think that it will. It draws on a certain mythological idea, and soldiers coming face to face with that. And I think that in that brief narrative form, it's really interesting to see what you can do in just 500 words, and if you can tell a complete story that way and still inspire something big from something so small. So yeah, with all that said, thank you so much for hanging out. I look forward to seeing you again next week. All right, take care, everybody. Peace out.